This morning, we're really delighted to welcome Dr. Francesco Pagnini to Hong Kong to discuss with us mindfulness and ALS research and a whole gamut of other topics. Francesco Pagnini is assistant professor at the Catholic University of Milan and postdoctoral associate at Harvard University, and he's also a consultant for NASA. Currently, he's leading a team of clinical researchers to research the clinical application of mindfulness for patients with ALS. So, welcome to Hong Kong.
Thank you.
Francesco. Why don't we open up the discussion by broadly discussing what your ideas about mindfulness are?
Well, you know, mindfulness is such a trendy topic right now and pretty much all around the world. But it's such a multifaceted concept that could be approached from different perspectives, and it would be quite mindless to approach mindfulness saying, okay, this is what mindfulness is. So my view about mindfulness is that there are several ways in which we could define it. And this is inherent with the concept. So many people associate mindfulness with the outcome of meditation, which is, I would suggest, it's a way we could see that. But I could also look at mindfulness as something that simply drags you in the present. For example, paying attention to how things change. And I am really interested in the approach that Ellen Langer made about mindfulness. So she defines mindfulness as paying attention to new things and being aware of how things change and how everything is in constant change. And I think this is very much in line with the general idea about mindfulness of being aware, being present, and with a non-judgmental attitude. So pretty much, I think that mindfulness is pretty much everything that drags you somehow in the present. And that implies some kind of creativity, some kind of curiosity, because, you know, if you're in the present, you're there, you're not in the future, you're not in the past. And if you're there, you don't know what's next. So you're curious. And you could be creative because you're gonna create what's next. And you should be flexible because, you know, once you buy the present moment, you're not in a predefined moment, in a predefined schema, and therefore you could be flexible to, you know, to adapt to the present moment.
So does it implies a certain kind of openness, freedom?
It does.
That what you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are many constructs that are somehow related to the concept of mindfulness: flexibility, openness, creativity, curiosity, awareness, and lack of judgment.
Yes. Yeah.
All these concepts are somehow related. So that's why it's so complicated to say what mindfulness is. I mean, we could pick a definition from the literature,
right,
which would be very narrowing.
It would be quite narrowing. So, with this sort of broader concept of mindfulness, how can you give some examples of how it has influenced your work in any of your fields?
Well, I mean, the concept of mindfulness, I work with the concept of mindfulness, and I try to do that mindfully.
Yeah.
So mindfulness itself, studying mindfulness has a big influence on my work itself. Because, for example, in my perspective, a mindful person is a person who challenges his beliefs.
Challenges his beliefs,
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, and no matter where you come from, and no matter, you know, what you studied and things like that, you could always challenge your perception and your ideas. So, for example, let's say we have a dominant paradigm. This is what ALS is. Yeah. It's a biologically driven disease. Well, why? We could challenge that and say, well, maybe that's a way of seeing it. Maybe we could also approach it from a different perspective and see what happens if I believe, for example, that there may be some other components other than the biological ones.
Yeah. And as I understand, you conducted a study with your team, and some of your findings, correct me if I'm wrong, have brought to light certain aspects of the mind that ALS patients can work with to live a more positive life, given that they are effectively immobilized for the rest of their life. Could you expand quickly a little bit on that?
Well, this is something, so we did a long study. It took 5 years to complete it. And the idea was, you know, if you try to meditate, try to stay still the very first time, no matter, you could have ALS, you could be everyone. Yeah. So you remain still. The very first time you do that, that could be an unpleasant experience, because after a little while, you may think, well, I want to move. Then my mind becomes, starts to wander,
All
goes
sorts of
away.
Regrets, fears, things
Oh,
like
what
that.
should I do?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm feeling itch or pruritus,
Yeah.
and I wanna move. So the very first experience could be unpleasant. And when I was thinking about that, and I was working with people with ALS, I thought, well, actually, a person with ALS eventually will be forced to do that, and not because it's doing an exercise, but because of the illness.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe if we give them some training before that, because after a little while, meditating is actually not an unpleasant experience.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, maybe we could use this kind of knowledge to provide a different experience.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking about applying mindfulness meditation to people with ALS. And so we designed with people at NEMO, the Neuromuscular Omni Center in Milan. There's a great center for ALS research in Milan, in Italy. So we started discussing about the possibility of creating some kind of mindfulness-based intervention for people with ALS, and also open to their caregiver, because we always talk about people with ALS, and we try to provide some kind of support, but there are also the people who live with them that feel the burden
Absolutely.
of
The carers,
care and so we've designed this intervention. We took the mindfulness-based stress reduction developed by Jon Kabat-Zinn, and we changed it according to the clinical peculiarities of people with ALS.
Right.
The main goal was to promote a different, I would say, a more mindful approach towards not only illness, but in general with the feelings that they feel.
Because they live with their feelings all day long.
Right. Because once you get this kind of diagnosis, it's easier to experience a lot of psychological reactions, including fear, anger, sadness, and sometimes it's not easy. Actually, most of the time, it's not easy to just put them, let's say, in the right place in the mind, which is being aware of this. Then you can manage it. But most of the time, it's not just not easy, and so you try to push them away or to ignore them, and your defense mechanism. They don't really, they don't necessarily work very well.
And so the objective of the training is to help them come to terms with their condition, and also, as you note, to live life beyond simply defining oneself as a sufferer of ALS.
Yeah, this is a big thing actually, because see, the main goal of the whole program is to be more aware and to change the relationship, with emotions and with the ideas that the person has towards the illness.
Right.
One of the big problems in ALS, which is a common problem in many clinical conditions, is the risk of identification between the person and the illness. If I stop being a person and I start being a patient, then I'm going to embody the disease. And that will have a whole effect, not only on my mind, but also on my body. And so this is a huge risk in many clinical situations. You go run every day, then you get a diagnosis. It could be ALS, it could be something different. And you embody that. So you stop being yourself and you start being an ALS patient, or whatever it is. And from that point on, you stop going run, because why would you do that?
Because you're an ALS
that's what you are. And this is a very narrow way of approaching the disease and the diagnosis experience. But this is something very common. So what we try to do, and there are many things that we try to do, but this is one of the things. We try to disassemble this identity and to give back to the person the idea, you are a person with multiple aspects. One of that could be the diagnosis, but just one of that. So that doesn't embody your whole person.
Fantastic. Let's move on a little bit to discuss something that sounds very, very interesting to me. And you're working with NASA. What consulting do you help them with?
Yeah, with the Langer Mindfulness Institute, we did consulting for NASA. Because NASA was interested in trying to discover how mindfulness, as a psychological construct, could be helpful for long duration exploration missions.
Right.
In particular, they were looking for something that could help people to go to Mars.
Right.
Because the NASA policy so far has been, we will try to get people, astronauts, who have the good stuff.
Right.
That's how they call it, which is, tough people.
Tough people.
John Wayne guys.
John Wayne's right.
And actually, they were very good at that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I must say that they've been successful. So they were right.
Right.
And they've been right so far, because having people, that kind of very resilient, very skillful, resourceful people for, let's say, short to middle term duration missions, that worked.
Yeah.
You want to send somebody to the moon,
Yeah.
you'll find a perfect stress-resistant person,
Yes.
and you'll send him.
Yeah.
And it does work.
Yeah.
But what about a 3-year mission?
A 3-year mission is much longer.
Yeah, that's much longer. And so you cannot just have resilient people. You also have to have resilient people who are able to cope and to adapt to different things. Not just, I'm not stressing out at all.
Yeah.
So the psychological approach should be, well, I'm very resilient, but in case of stress, in case I feel stress, I'm also able to manage it, not just to put it away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so looking at these long duration missions, they were starting being interested in some kind of strategies and interventions that could improve this kind of coping strategies whenever necessary.
Given sort of exploration into deep space over, say, an extended period of time, I would venture to imagine that being an astronaut in whatever spacecraft is extremely challenging. Of course, in the short term, it's challenging enough, and therefore you have those resilient people. But for those who really need to get adjusted to sort of being alone or being only with a few different people, living an entirely different life, but it must be quite a challenge, and you need to adapt to that kind of change.
Oh yeah. The adaptation is the key of mindfulness, in my view, because when you're mindful, when you're there, you can adapt.
Right.
But if you just use preset strategies, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best strategy you can use in the present moment.
Yeah.
So being aware, being mindful, being there is actually the key for a better adaptation and how to respond to situations.
Final question: since you've been describing mindfulness as sort of something quite much broader than meditation, any practical steps to being able to do this kind of mindfulness while you're not meditating? Well,
mindfulness. If you look at the mindfulness literature, mindfulness is such a big concept because it's related. Mindfulness, as a psychological construct, is related with a lot of what we consider positive outcomes: well-being, charisma, even animals like more mindful people, and children. So and there's a lot of research about that. The mistake that sometimes is made is to associate it with meditation, period.
Right.
So mindfulness is meditation. Mindfulness is not meditation. Meditation is a way which you can achieve and you can improve mindfulness, but it's not the only one. And being mindful, in my view, it's not only my view. I work a lot with Leland Langer, and she provides a different background. She provides different idea, and other scholars as well. Meditation is an interesting way, but it takes a lot of time, and it's not for everybody. And as my meditation teacher used to say, meditation is not for everybody at the same time.
Right.
Because there are different moments in your life. But that doesn't mean that if you do not meditate, you cannot be mindful. So there's no dichotomy for that. For example, one way to be mindful is just paying attention to how things change. Right now, we're having this conversation, and we're two different people than we were at the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
It's not only about mood. Something has changed, and if we pay attention to the subtle details in our life, in everybody's life, in real world, or whatever it is, then that's what drugs us in the present.
Yeah, that's what roots us in the present. So I'm a changed person now. Thank you very much, Francesco, for sitting down with us and talking about your research and ideas. And we hope you enjoy your stay in Hong Kong.
Thank you for inviting me, and hope everybody a good life.
Thank you so much.